He was remanded in custody September 27, 2000. When he was readmitted to the charges, he was jailed for 22 months. After Whitling became his jail term for car theft and dangerous driving, they carried forensics tests in 1988 of the white Ducato van, which he had brought on the June 23rd. On February 6, 2001, following 7 months of investigation, he was charged with the murder of Sarah Payne. Now we move on to the trial. On February 6, 2001, he appeared at a loose Crown Court and was charged with abduction and murder. Whitling pleaded not guilty on both charges, and he was remanded in custody while serving his sentence for his murdering offense. Welcome back to the True Crime Lounge podcast. I have a merch shop that you can check out. I also have a Patreon that you can join for early episodes that is scheduled to come out. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. With that being said, let's dive into today's episode, shall we? On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the UK version of Megan's Law, and the case that inspires a law change law change. Which leads me to my question, what is the average age of sex offenders? The majority of adults and sex offenders are in their teens, 20s, and early 30s. They usually have a very criminal background, including such high crimes as breaking and entering, theft, and physical assault. And they usually begin their career at an early age. Now, the UK has developed a sex offenders register, um, and registered in Sarah's law to keep communities safe from sex offenders. However, Sarah's law is quite different from Megan's law, particularly because there is no direct public access to UK sex offenders registry. Now, you're probably wondering, who is this what is this Sarah's law? Who is it based off of? Why did her case change the law? Well, Sarah Evelyn Isabel Payne was born October 13, 1991. She was the victim of a high-profile abduction and murder in West Sussex, England. In July 2000, her disappearance and the subsequent investigation into her murder became a prominent case in the UK, as well as the campaign for the changes to protection of legislative. The murder investigation also was notable for the use of forensic evidence, and which played a key part in securing a conviction of Roy Ridley, who was convicted of abduction and December 2001 and sentenced to life in prison. Um, so let's talk about Sarah's disappearance now. As she lived in Hersham, Surrey, her disappearance on the evening of July 2000, from a cornfield near her home of a grandmother, Terence Payne, who was and his second wife, Leslie, um, and not her grandfather, not grandmother, but yes, in the Kingston Course, West Sussex, England. Payne had been playing with her two brothers. They were 13 and 11 at the time. Her younger sister, who was 5 when she disappeared. A police search of the local area commenced and quickly transformed into a nationwide search in national news, with members of the Payne family making numerous televisions and numerous appearances for a safe return. So, on the evening of July 2nd, 2000, officers of the Sussex Police first visited Roy Ridley and at his seafront flat in Littlehampton As far as the inquiries into Sarah Payne's disappearance, a number of suspects, particularly convicted sex offenders, were also questioned, and this would lead at least one investigator to an arrest. Other person was arrested. So police officers and numerous volunteers secured the area of Littlehampton for clues regarding Sarah's disappearance, and her family made daily appears to national television news for help in her finding her. On July 10th, police announced that they had received information regarding the sighting of a girl who matched Sarah's description at Cut Nuts for service on the M6 motorway in Cheshire. Um, on the morning after her disappearance, 3 days later, Michael and Sarah Payne were warned by the police to prepare for the worst. Explaining the emphasis of the inquiries that had shifted from there was the possibility of their daughter might not be found well. On July 17th, a body was found near Pulborough, Pulborough, some 15 miles from Kingston Course, where Sarah Payne had disappeared. And the next day, Sussex police confirmed that the body had been identified as Sarah Payne. Police first visited Whitling's flat on the afternoon of July 2nd, 2000, but he was not there. The police returned that evening to question him for over an hour before leaving. And the police would leave his flat, but suspicious of the apparent lack of concern for Sarah, which disappeared from the attitude of at least one other known sex offender who had already seen, who questioned. And when Whitling reappeared soon afterward and attempted to drive away in his van, it is in his van he was stopped by the police. He spent 2 days in custody, and but the police had no concrete evidence to press the charges. Although he was later received a field of the barn near Hillborough, in which contradicted his alibi, and beginning his fun affair of the hole at 5:30 p.m., and then returning to his flat at 9:30 p.m. on the night of Sarah's disappearance. Um, so while he was released on bail, and police have found a receipt at the Buckburn garage on A24 not far from Coolham, where one of Sarah's shoes was found, which would contradict his alibi. After his arrest, he did not return to Littlehampton flat, where he lived with his father in Crawley. On July 20th, 3 days after Sarah's body was found, a shoe was recovered along the roadside in the village of Coolham, 3 miles from Pulborough, and identified as one of those belonging to Sarah Payne. On July 23rd, Whitling stole a Vox Nova in Crawley, and he was pressured by the police to speed up at 70 miles per hour. And I'm gonna say something real quick. I'm using miles per hour because I live in America, and that's what we use. So I'm just go ahead and clarifying that. But back to the episode. Before he parked in his vehicle, Whitling was arrested and charged with dangerous driving. He was remanded in custody September 27, 2000. When he was readmitted to the charges, he was jailed for 22 months. After Whitling became his jail term for car theft and dangerous driving, they carried forensics tests in 1988 of the white Ducato van, which he had brought at 20 on the June 23rd. On February 6, 2001, following 7 months of investigation, he was charged with the murder of Sarah Payne. Now we move on to the trial. On February 6, 2001, he appeared at a Lewes Crown Court and was charged with abduction and murder. Whitling pleaded not guilty on both charges, and he was remanded in custody while serving his sentence for his murdering offenses, but the new charges against him prevented his release from prison during the summer of that year. and his trial would begin November 14, 2001. And the jury heard from several witnesses, the key witness, including Sarah Payne's older brother, who had been a scruffy looking man with yellowish teeth, driving through Kingston courts on the evening of that Sarah went missing. Lee Payne did not pick him out. However, he was able to select the identity parade. One of Payne's shoes was found as a member of a public in the country lane, and the forensic tests have been found fibers, and which whittling van of the shoe. This is the only item of Payne's clothing to be recovered. A strand of blonde hair on a t-shirt was found, and a DNA test established that there was a 1 in a billion chance it was belonging to anyone other than Payne. Hmm. Now, the jury also heard testimony of two motorists who recalled a white van being parked on the roadside pulling off a track, evening of July 1st, 2000, near the site where Sarah's body was later found. On December 12, 2001, after a 4 week trial, Mr. Justice Curtis, and a grand jury, Whiting was convinced one of the abductions of murder of Payne, and he was sentenced to life in prison. And the trial judge said it was a rare case in which a life sentence should mean life. And after he was convicted, his previous convictions were revealed, which had been withheld from the jury and media. So, and police feared the knowledge of this conviction would jeopardize the trial. In the event of being convicted, he could argue that he had been tried on evidence of an earlier crime, paving the way for appeal and possible freedom. Now, the fact that Whitney Whiting had now exposed him as a repeat offender sparked a renewed call for governments to allow public access to sex offenders. However, although on the day after Whiting's conviction, the Home Office committed that such a system will be unworkable, running the risk of driving pedophiles underground and making it more difficult for the public to monitor and relocate them, and putting them in a dangerous vigilante attacks. This case is also notable for the extensive use of forensic science in establishing the prosecution case against Whiting. Um, 20 forensic experts from a variety of fields were employed during this inquiry, including entomology, palynology, don't even know what that is, but anyway, environmental profiling, oil lubricant analysis, pathology, geology, and archaeology. It's estimated that the investigation involved 1,000 personnel and cost nearly 3 million euros. Let's move on to the sentencing. On November 24, 2002, the Home Secretary, David Blunkett, ordered that Rory Riding must serve a minimum of 50 years, and this made him eligible for parole in 2051. He would be he will be at least 92 before parole could be considered, if he makes it that long. There's a special place for child pedophiles in prison, if you catch my drift. Um, and this was in effect in an agreement when the trial judge had a recommendation of the old trial tariff. Within 48 hours of the ruling, the law lords of the European Court of Human Rights have ruled in favor of another convicted murderer, Anthony Anderson. That's a very common name, I think. Anyway, who was challenging the right of politicians to decide how long a murderer must spend in prison before being considered for parole. In June of 2004, the media reported that Whiting would apply to the Court of Appeals for his reduction of a 50-year sentence. On June 9th, his appeal resulted in the High Court reducing a 50-year term to a 10-year term, and his lawyers argued that the 50-year term was politically motivated. Now, the decision was also made at the time when the government was under fire for the public of immediate faster and striking firefighter strikes. Mr. Justice Simmons said in July 2010 sentencing guidelines, and Whiting might have been received a whole a whole life tariff. Whiting is now serving a 40-year minimum term, and this will keep him in prison until 2041, when he will be 82. Payne's mom, Sarah, was present, and she said she was disappointed by the decision and that life should mean life.